Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, I am so jealous of you right now.
Yeah, I did not watch a second of the Browns-Steelers game, although actually it's your fault I did end up watching a second because you were telling me fanciful stories about how gladiatorial it was, so I Googled
I did no such
the
thing.
game. And the thing is, you were 100% right. And I ended up watching a tweet where Demarius Randall earholed Deontay Johnson. What the hell, man?
Yeah, this was, and I had said to you, and then I ended up just throwing it on Twitter as well, that this game was like the football equivalent of standing around while you wait for your dog to poop out on a walk. It's
an incredible analogy.
Cars are driving by and you got your baggie out. It's the football equivalent of the coworker who microwave fish in the office. It's just, and you sit there and you go, why? What are you doing? It's so bad.
So the Browns are up at time of recording. There's still time to lose, I'm sure. 21-7.
And they
2 minutes left. Yeah, I could see the Steelers still winning this.
I know. Well, what I had said to you, normally we have a bit of a rule for recording the Thursday night show, which is we tend to watch the Thursday game, and then if it's a blowout, we'll start recording early in the fourth quarter because it's, there's nothing to watch. And I started up even though the game was close, I told you, I started up my computer in protest of this game's existence. I just needed to be done. I can't watch headhunting cornerbacks on Cleveland anymore. I couldn't watch drives of for the Steelers exist solely on pass interference. I'm done. This is not NFL football. This is just sad. I need to, especially after the after the Juju Schuster concussion, where he looked like he was trying to get up from being shot in a war movie, and then he just collapsed and didn't move for a few minutes. I'm out. I watched too much of a game that was terrible already. Nothing you both should get losses for how bad that game was. Ugh.
So I played a board game called Terraforming Mars. I highly recommend it.
It was, as it turns out, it was much more interesting, much more there was more development on the field.
It was safer. It ended up being a last second finish. I lost by 2 victory points out of 60, so it's pretty close. Fun game, man.
Excellent. Well, I don't know if it'll be better than public assistance, but we'll have to find that out when we do that in Seattle.
when we go to the public assistance underground.
Exactly. We're taking the underground tour and we're bringing public assistance with us. It'll be great. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. I was about to say that's it for this episode of Norse Code and just
well, we're done. Thanks.
All we wanted to do was come on and complain about the Cleveland Pittsburgh game. It was gonna be great. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have some stuff to talk about, including a preview of the Broncos game and the mailbag. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for donating to the show, for hearing value in what we produce, and for just sending out links on social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Again, really do appreciate it. We do have a Patreon donor to mention quickly. His name is Christian. Thank you, Christian, so much. Your swag will come after we go to Seattle. Again, thank you so much, Mr. Christian. Just a quick note, if you are interested in going to the live show taping, we do have a time for that now. On November 29th, we'll be taping a special live edition of Norse Code from Pedosky's in Seattle, starting at about 7 o'clock, but we will likely do the actual recording itself sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. We are working on things like guests and everything. Arif should be welcomed pretty loudly back from the Seattle Twitter faithful. But if you are, the Twitter faithful. But if you are interested in attending, go ahead and head on out. We're not selling tickets to the actual taping itself or anything. So if anybody says anything about that, they're wrong. But we are giving away a free ticket to the football game on Monday night. We'll be giving that away after the taping. So I have to figure out exactly how we're gonna decide who ends up going to that. I think we should do some sort of like a Norse code quiz or something that says, what does Arif call turkey, and trash bird or whatever ends up being the answer. And then we just
people like submit their answers and then we grade the. Oh
yeah, I feel like creativity the creativity possibly. Maybe it'll end up being best Vikings jersey there. I'll be the sucker for the ham jersey. So yeah, it'll be fine. But if you are interested in attending, it will be starting at 7 p.m. Pacific. I will be posting that episode early on Saturday morning once I make it back to my Airbnb and can do just a little bit of editing. So that should be a lot of fun. You guys listening will have access to that as soon as I can make it available. And just as a side note, if you listened to last year's live show, there was a problem with the audio in that we were fighting a DJ who they had double booked us. So we were in the back and trying to do the show, and we had like a very passive aggressive DJ who was slowly like making the music louder throughout the entire episode to the point where it was very noticeable.
He was like really passive. Like I didn't expect this out of New York City, honestly.
I would expect this from Mankato, but not from.
Yeah, this is like a real Minnesota move, which I have to admire.
not from some place in Gramercy Park. No, this is absurd. Why would you do such a thing? There will not be ridiculously loud music for this episode. So if you were thinking about kind of skipping it or whatever, because live shows tend to have that sort of thing, that will not be the case for this one. So, but if you enjoy the show, if you hear value in what we produce twice a week during the regular season, you can donate to the show at patreon.com/NorseCode. Donations of $3.50 or more per month do end up getting you free swag if you are a new Patreon donor. We'll be doing that through the end of October. Or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate to the show there. Again, all these things help us do things like the live show. They help us remain ad-free. They help keep the lights on, help pay for all the back-end stuff, maybe a little bit of a promotion stuff here and there, and help us acquire some of the swag that we end up kind of giving out to the patrons. So, again, thank you so much, especially to you, Mr. Christian. And let's go to an interview that Arif recorded earlier today with the Benjamin Albright.
All right, I'm here with Benjamin Albright, who is a radio broadcaster for KOA Radio in Colorado. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. He knows a lot about the Denver Broncos. He pretends to know a lot about football, which we'll accept for now on this podcast. Obviously, the first question I have to ask you is, what are the responsibilities of five technique in a trio dog sky fire?
Well, start with the inside shade. Oh, it's an old running joke, and you guys can email all your complaints to Arif. He's at carsonwentzfan5@gmail.com.
Well played. All right, so let's talk about these Broncos. Obviously, I mean, first I would love to talk about kind of how interesting it is that offensive line has fallen off, and how poor it is. But really, I mean, clearly the story offensively is about Brandon Allen, right? You've been fighting rumors on Twitter that the team is out on Drew Lock. They seem to be bought in, but that's irrelevant right now because Brandon Allen is the quarterback. What kind of quarterback is he? Does he pose like a threat to a Vikings defense that is not the top defense in the league anymore, but is still pretty good?
Well, who is Brandon Allen as a quarterback? Let's start there. You're obviously very familiar with Case Keenum, so think of the poor man's Case Keenum, and you have Brandon Allen.
So that's Lance Zierlein's comp at NFL.com for the scouting report when Allen was coming out.
No, is it? That's funny. Yeah, that's who he is as a quarterback. I mean, he's got a little more mobility than you think he does. He'll make some throws, but he's also one of those guys that doesn't have the strongest arms. Got to have a set base in order to make throws. Struggles with the tight end seam. His best bet is running shallow stuff and let his receivers make the plays. And if you look at the one game of tape anybody has on him against the Browns, that Browns game from a couple weeks ago, you'll see that. He hits Noah Fant on the crosser, and then Fant takes it 80 yards to the house. He lays a ball out there, and Cortland Sutton made a great play on it for a touchdown. So he's not the guy that's going to carry a team, but if you've got playmakers, he can get the ball to him. Kind of more of a point guard than a quarterback, if that makes sense. He's really kind of auditioning for the long-term backup job here in Denver. Drew Lock is the future, and they are going to go to Lock at some point this season. If Lock's ready by the Chargers game, he'll be the guy. If he's not ready by then, it'll be sometime between there and the Lions game. So, for Denver fans, it's really about, is Brandon Allen good enough to be the backup and spot start guy, and can they dump Flacco in that contract after the season?
Can they?
Well, yeah, they can. They can walk away with it, $10 million in dead cap, but they currently have a little over, I think, about $18 million available cap space, give or take. And so they'll roll that over, and that'll offset the $10 million dead cap, and it'll be a wash. They're looking forward to doing that if at all possible. When they brought Joe Flacco out here, they were hoping it was kind of the Joe Flacco of 2012 when Garrett Kubiak was out there, and he was being successful off boot action. But Joe's so limited anymore in terms of mobility and stuff like that. He's 5-step drop and plant guy, and it was making the offensive line look even worse than it is, which is a chore in and of itself because it's pretty bad. That's one of the things. If they can do that and they can settle the quarterback position with Drew Lock, that means they can go into the draft looking at an offensive tackle at the top to replace Garrett Bowles, and then kind of go from there. You've got the interior of the Broncos line is pretty good. Dalton Risner at left guard looks like a star in the making. Connor McGovern can play center or left guard. He'll be the center. And then Elijah Wilkinson at the right guard position will replace Ron Leary when they get rid of him this offseason. Right now he's playing right tackle since Juwan James has decided he doesn't want to play football on most days.
Okay. So Wilkinson, if he's playing right tackle, I mean, I don't think many of us kind of know who he is or how good he is, but he's going to be lining up against Danielle Hunter. Does he stand a chance? I mean, this is a game where the 3 top pass rushers in terms of total pressures produced per PFF are playing. Von Miller, Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter. One of them is going to be lining up against this guy I've never heard of, Elijah Wilkinson. Yeah,
Wilkinson, he's really good against the bull rush, and he's great in the run game, but he struggles with speed rushers, and it's going to be a problem. You look at this and you look at Hunter, and it's probably going to be a problem this game. I'm not saying this is a game where Hunter's going to want to set the tape up for his All-Pro resume, but he's probably going to want to hang on to it for that. So they'll give help over there. They'll bring Jeff Hireman over there and Noah Fant over there to kind of help. But he struggles with those speed rushers. That's really his Achilles heel. He's really more of a guard. They use him as a swing tackle like they used Billy Turner last year, but he's not as athletic as Turner was.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Garrett Bowles. So I know, after his rookie year, a lot of people were they're having like little victory laps about how we shouldn't care about offensive lineman age. Bowles obviously entered the draft much older than most offensive linemen do. Not quite as old as Danny Watkins, but since then it feels like he's been a disappointment. Obviously, he's a penalty machine, as you kind of alluded to. But he's going up against Everson Griffin, who he commits about 1 penalty a game, usually encroachment. But where do you think his impact as a left tackle is going to be felt more? Do you think it's going to be in pure pass protection against Griffin, or do you think he's going to commit a couple of critical penalties and that's going to really hurt the Broncos?
Well, that's the key. If he goes penalty free, this offense does a lot better. The problem is they cross the 50 and Garrett can't stop holding. The problem with Garrett Bowles is he only got 1 pass protection set. He's only got 1 set when he drops back, and defenders figure that out by the second and third quarter. And then he winds up having to hold to compensate for it. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed to be charitable. he's just a guy that ultimately doesn't get it. An athletic specimen who's very, very strong, but he just doesn't understand the nuances of the game. Probably, topped out as a collegiate athlete, but, you take a chance on talent like that at the pro level just because he's so athletic and so strong. But, he's never going to be confused for a member of Mensa. So he's a guy who, when you're in the run game, he can get out there and he can road grade you. Even the guys you think are really strong out there, he held his own against Davian Clowney in the run game. But when you're dropping him back into pass pro, he just doesn't get it. He's got one set, and you put a move on him, and he's either going to hold or he's going to olay, and you're going to have a clear shot to the quarterback. And the Broncos, where you had Joe Flacco, who, like I said, was 5 steps and stop. He didn't even step up in the pocket. They just created a straight line back to the quarterback, and that edge rush arc was so easy to get to that it made Garrett look even worse than he was. Brandon Allen at least can move around, but I suspect you're probably going to see a holding penalty or two against Garrett Bowles. You're probably going to see a sack or two come off of Garrett Bowles' side just because he's just not an NFL caliber starting left tackle.
Well, let's talk about that run game a little bit. So Denver is 8th in expected points produced from the run game. Philip Lindsay is, I think, equivalent essentially to Dalvin Cook in yards per carry. That run game seems to be producing even when the passing offense around them can't, even when I think that offensive line has been subject to kind of a lot of criticism. Is it just a line that's better built for run blocking? Is Lindsay doing a lot of this on his own? What's the nature of that? And how do they match up against, two linebackers that are having really remarkable careers in Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr?
Well, it's a combination of both. Phil Lindsay is a creator in the run game, but he reminds you more of, and I hate to invoke this name, but Darren McFadden, in the sense that he's a high variance back. He'll get 1, 2, 2, 4, 2, 4, 20, when he explodes off the edge and outside zone. Or if you lose him because he's so short, you lose him behind that offensive line, and then he comes squirting through, and he'll rip a 20, 25-yarder off on you. Royce Freeman's a little more slow and steady. He's only got 2 gears, but he's good for 3 or 4 a pop, and he can get 6 to 8 at a time as well. And they use Royce in the pass game as well. He's got better hands than you think. Both of them really do, but and they do love to target the running backs in the pass game as an extension of the run. But as far as the offensive line goes, it's built more for the run game. I mean, the whole hallmark, and you guys probably know this now, but the hallmark of the Gary Kubiak, Mike Shanahan offense is zone run left, boot action right, and get the defense leaning. And that's just kind of what it is. You got a kind of an agile offensive line that likes zone running, and they're kind of built for that. They're really not built for a whole lot of pass pro because you're buying extra time with the boot action going the other direction. That's where you get the additional pass protection from.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about kind of that skill group outside of Lindsay and Freeman. It's a remarkably, now that they've traded away Emmanuel Sanders, it's a remarkably young skill core. You've got Cortland Sutton, Deshaun Hamilton, both drafted in 2018. Juwan Winfrey drafted 2019. Obviously, Noah Fant drafted in 2019. And then you've got Troy Fumagalli, 2018. You've got Andrew Beck, who I think they just grabbed off of waivers from New England, who's a tight end / fullback. Is the youth of this group both like an asset and a liability? Does it lean in one direction or the other? What's the direction for the skill group?
Well, yeah, the elder statesman for the receiving corps is Tim Patrick, and he's 25. I just got through talking to him a little bit ago, and he's actually going to be back for this game. So that's one that you may want to familiarize yourself with. He's been on IR all year. It's be his first game back. He's chomping at the bit. He was kind of Case Keenum's third down security blanket guy last year when Emmanuel Sanders went down. So it'll be interesting to see if he can step up and be a compliment to Cortland Sutton. Cortland's been a monster this year, but you kind of have that Antonio Brown Juju effect, where he was getting number 2 coverage all year. Now he's getting number 1 coverage, but a little less effective. He's not a complete receiver yet. He's still kind of an athlete, basketball player, playing receiver out there, but he can be a monster. He's a monster athlete. So the Broncos are really trying to find that other receiver, that Z receiver that's going to be, the X receiver that's going to be that's going to be complimentary to him. Tim Patrick's at least going to get a shot at it this game. Tim's another big guy with some straight line speed. and he can get down the field. Deshaun Hamilton's been a bit of a disappointment. If you're comparing him to anybody, he's kind of comparable to Jabbar Gaffney a little bit. A guy that doesn't have elite athleticism, but he'll find the soft spot in zone. Just kind of the knack for that, and he'll sit down there and catch, move the chains. Fant, Fant's an all-world athlete, but he's been hit or miss. He had 3 drops in the Kansas City game where he left 117 yards on the field, dropping deep balls. But then he comes back and has that highlight play against the Browns where, he's running the 9-yard crosser and stiff arms 2 or 3 defenders on his way to the house. So it just depends on which Noah Fant shows up. He's not the greatest blocker in the world either. The Broncos really, the engine that drives it is his own run game. It's Lindsey and Freeman, and then they try to catch you napping, when you bring the safeties down in the box and hit you over the top. They haven't had a whole lot of success with the deep ball, and they're really trying to find some speed. They're hoping Tim Patrick will be that. They've even tried to create opportunities for Deontay Spencer, the punt returner, just to try to get some deep speed and get that going, but no success so far.
Is that going to work? So obviously for the Vikings, who have Kubiak, that's worked for them, but they've got a quarterback that's got the ability to hit those deep shots more often than not. They've got a quarterback that's among the league best when it comes to play action. But when you don't have a quarterback that can hit those deep shots or doesn't have kind of the same fluidity and ability in play action, does focusing on, you've got a run blocking line, you've got, some blocking tight ends that can do pretty well. You're centering your game around Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. Is that enough to create an offense? I mean, the numbers suggest that they don't, but they've got a new quarterback in there. So is this something that the Broncos can have going forward?
Well, they're better with Brandon Allen than they were with Joe Flacco. They averaged over 7 yards per play with Brandon Allen. That's the most they've averaged since Peyton Manning was quarterbacking here. With Joe Flacco, I think it was like 5.3 yards per play. That's terrible. 5.3 yards per completion. The yards per play was even lower than that. I think they can with Drew Lock at quarterback. Lock has an arm that can challenge defenses vertically, and he's got speed. Like Lock, he's faster than you think. He's as fast as some of the receivers on this team. You wouldn't know it to look at him. I think with Drew Lock, you can craft an offense that can do that. I think you just have to have the right skill set, the right guys in order to be able to make this offense work.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about the defense then, because since 2015, this has just been kind of the identity of the team, the way that we think about it. Obviously, they hired Vic Fangio, who is going to take all these really remarkable tools and continue, I think, this legacy of a great defense. Not a lot of people are talking about this defense, but they're the 5th best defense in points per drive. Why is it? Is it just the record? Is it close games? Why is it that the defense just isn't getting that much attention nationally?
Well, I think it's a bad offensive team, and people aren't really paying attention. It's different because you highlighted the defense has been the identity of this team, and it has. But it's bizarre because this year, philosophically, the defense is almost a polar opposite of what it's been for the last 4 or 5 years. When you had Wade Phillips and you had Vance Joseph and Joe Woods, who are Wade Phillips disciples, you have a philosophy where you're lining up in that under front. You're trying to send the house after the quarterback, and you put your corners on islands with maybe a one-high zone. Vic Fangio is almost the opposite. Vic Fangio is still running the underfronts, but you're going to see Vic Fangio's philosophy is send the least amount of people at the quarterback that he needs to get pressure, and everybody else is dropping back into zones, or a mixed match of man underneath, zone over the top, kind of umbrella zone philosophy. So what used to be a cover 1, cover 3 team is now a cover 2, cover 4 team. That's benefited Justin Simmons a lot. He's having a fantastic year. One of the best safeties in football right now, I think, probably outside of Minka. I think it's different to watch. It'll allow you to get some yardage, but it clamps down once you get inside about the 30. That umbrella zone is just so tough to move the football on, and you wind up settling for field goals or no points at all, and you wind up getting highly in the points per drive, category. So I think people are talking about it just because the team in and of itself is not winning football games. But, this defense has allowed, 17 or fewer points 4 or 5 times, and they come away with, I think, 3 and 2. Doing that, 2 losses, allowing less than 17 points is inexcusable in the modern NFL.
So part of that has to do with the fact that they haven't had a great record in close games, but they've been in a lot of close games. Mike Zimmer mentioned that this team is a lot better than their record. Their point differential is a lot better than you'd expect a team of that record to be. Do you think that's a fair characterization? Do you think this team is really kind of more of a 500 team?
Yeah, I do actually. And they could. There are 3 games in here where you could have won them. They had 2 games where they had scored go-ahead scores with a minute and a half or less to go and lost both games. You can look at the Jacksonville game, you look at the Bears game where they gave up in both games 75, 80-yard drives for game-winning scores to their opponent right there at the end. Part of that was guys learning the new defense and making mistakes on plays, but it's just a situation where the Browns were driving in that Browns game where they could have done it before the defense closed down. So I think, the nature of how they play offense and, like I said, ball control, running the ball, you're going to have closer games anyway, but they just had some poor luck this season with last-minute drives and could very easily have 2 more wins, maybe even 3 than what they wound up with.
All right, well, yeah, let's talk about some of these defenders individually. We'll get to Von Miller in a second. I'm kind of curious about this defensive line. So they draft Draymond Jones in the 3rd round. He hasn't seen the field a ton, but he has seen the field. Shelby Harris, according to PFF, is having a really remarkable season. But also, I'm kind of interested in Mike Purcell, who was maybe the best defensive lineman in the AAF, seems to be continuing to have a fairly good year as a run defender, which is primarily what he's been. We see Derek Wolfe. He's been a part of this defense for a while. I've seen DeMarcus Walker flash. He's got a lot of sacks, even though he hasn't had a ton of snaps. How do you characterize that interior defensive line? And are they too talented for Draymond Jones to have an early impact?
Well, that is what it is. There's no room for him to crack in just yet because they started off the season with the 3 linemen were Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris was running the nose, and Adam Gotsis was the 5 tech. They switched and moved after the Jacksonville game because they could not stop the run. They moved Shelby Harris out to the 5, which is a natural spot for him, playing 3 or 5, and then they moved Purcell in to be the nose, and it has been a revelation ever since then. Purcell's playing lights out. Shelby's more comfortable back in the spot where he belongs. Gotsis, comes in on a rotational basis a little bit, but he's probably gone the end of the year. But they started bringing Walker in, and he's able to get pressure. And so it's really been kind of a revelation as teams try to focus on Von Miller. You're getting Derek Wolfe and you're getting DeMarcus Walker that are getting penetration, whereas they didn't used to. Derek Wolfe and those defensive ends used to clean up the blocking and allow guys like Von or Shaq Barrett in years past to get in there and make the sack. And now, instead of that, they're getting the chance to make their own sacks, and Derek Wolfe leads the team in sacks.
Well, so speaking of sacks, I think a lot of people have characterized Von Miller as having a down year, 4.5, 5 sacks, something like that. But he also, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the league leaders in pressure. So he just isn't getting home, which is not a typical problem for him. And from an analytics perspective, typically what you see from players that have high pressure numbers but low sack rates in the first half of the season is that in the second half of the season, those sacks come back around. It tends to even out, unless it's like a Brian Robinson or Brandon Graham. Do you think that this is the case for Von Miller? He's not actually having a down year. He's not getting home, but the team is producing sacks. He might be flushing other players into sacks. He's going to get some of those sacks on the back end of the season.
Yeah, I think so. If you go back to the Colts game, he had Jacoby Brissett in the end zone for a safety that would have clinched the game, and Jacoby broke out of the tackle. He's getting plenty of pressure and disruption in his production, but not getting home. I think part of it's scheme change. Von, his game is that quick first step, getting downhill, and then elite bend to get around the tackles. That's his game, right? And then using the spin move when they start setting up on that outside rip. So it's a little bit different because Vic likes his outside linebackers to take one step back and fake like they're dropping into the zone before they take off after the quarterback. That negates Von's advantage. It allows the tackle to get back and get into his set and then kind of just swallow up that rush instead of trying to athletically move back and get in that kick slide and try to block Von Miller, off the hip or however you're going to do it. So I think part of it is schematically Von's, having to adjust a little bit because of what he's asked to do is differently now. But he's still Von Miller. He's still one of the preeminent pass rushers the last couple of years, and he's still getting the pressure. I think he's fourth in pressure rate, if I remember correctly, in the NFL right now. So, part of that's just not getting home. He'll figure it out. I don't think that Von Miller is any means washed, as some are suggesting. And you have people here in Denver screaming to trade the guy and blow it up, which is ludicrous. The team's not taking a $19.5 million dead cap hit to trade Von Miller. But, I think people are underestimating, and, you know how it is. Guys that don't know what they don't know, and they just see the numbers aren't there, and, oh, well, he must be getting old. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned one player that you could consider to be kind of a secret superstar in Justin Simmons, who's been playing pretty remarkably well. Another player that seems to be fairly well liked, no matter kind of what angle you look at it, film, PFF, basic box score statistics, expected points, whatever. Alexander Johnson. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, he has been a revelation. That's another guy. They pulled Josie Jewell, who's an instinctive but athletically limited linebacker, to put Alexander Johnson in there. That's right around the same time they did the Purcell move, and it's really kind of helped out a lot. Alexander's much better going away from the ball, much better in coverage. He'd come downhill too, don't get me wrong, and he's a big boy. When he hits you, you'll know it. But Josie coming out of Iowa was kind of a run funnel guy. You just follow the run to him, that he's a sure tackler, he has decent instincts. But it really showed up in that Green Bay game. He's how athletically limited he is when that fullback roasted him for a touchdown that wasn't even close. So I think that they've been looking to get more athletic at the inside linebackers. I mean, even the other inside linebacker, Todd Davis, is not what you would call super athletic. And I know we're talking about NFL players that are the top 1% of the world, but in terms of NFL athleticism, he's not that athletic. So, Alexander Johnson, his athleticism has been big. He's missed some assignments here or there, but it's just been luck of the draw kind of stuff, that when he misses them, other things happen to be happening. So he's kind of gotten away with it. He's still learning the position. He still makes some mistakes, but when he's on, he's on. And, he's one of the other things that is not in the box score is the attitude that he brings. I mean, he's kind of a thumper, and it really kind of jacks the team. When he's out there, he's one of those guys that keeps guys loose. And I think that's the other part of it, is he comes out there and he provides a fresh energy that, maybe you weren't getting out of a subdued guy like Josie Jewell.
So that group lines up against an offensive line that is significantly better than it used to be with the Vikings, but is still, you wouldn't mistake them for an average offensive line either. Brian O'Neill seems to be playing well. Riley Reef seems to be kind of average. And then that interior is kind of a mess. What are kind of the biggest opportunities for, I guess, the Denver defensive line? And then conversely, kind of what are the biggest problems for that Vikings offensive line, knowing that, the Denver defense is fairly familiar with this type of offense?
Well, yeah, it's not like these two offenses aren't going to be familiar with each other. I think that if you're the Vikings, you want to make sure that when you're running the ball, you're setting that edge well. That's really, because Purcell's going to get pressure up the middle. I mean, he's just an incredibly strong human being. He's surprisingly strong. He's got one of those laid back, super nice personalities. Gentle giant kind of thing going on, and you don't suspect him of having kind of that kind of violent strength, but he really does. And he'll get push up the middle. The key is whether or not the Broncos are sending anybody up the middle with him, whether it's a linebacker or safety, get after the quarterback, and then setting the edge in the run game. That was the problem early on when they were letting guys like Josh Jacobs and Leonard Fournette run on them. They struggled against power run guys that could get to the edge. So that's really going to be the key for the Vikings. If those tackles and tight ends can hold up on the edge on the run game, you'll be successful.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the secondary, which I think in the past has been kind of, a nice supplementary to the pressure that the Broncos have been able to produce. Chris Harris, there were trade rumors for him before the trade deadline. I think you were pretty adamant that he wasn't going to get traded, but whatever, he didn't end up getting traded. Kareem Jackson, I think, was kind of a jewel of free agency, and they're not playing poorly, but they certainly aren't playing, I think, to the level that we've seen in the past. They're going up against Stephon Diggs and et cetera, whether it's BC Johnson or Laquan Treadwell. Adam Thielen's probably not going to be ready to play the game. Are they the type of team? Is Vic Fangio the kind of coach that's going to shift coverage to Diggs? Is Diggs going to find his opportunities regardless? Is Justin Simmons going to be able to cap on top of those routes, prevent the deep ball? How do you see this matchup playing out?
Well, you'll see philosophically an umbrella zone. They'll mix it up at times to try to keep you guessing, but philosophically at its core, it's an umbrella zone. Keep you contained. Don't allow stuff over the top. Keep the play in front of you, and then we'll clamp down once you get in the red zone. It's kind of philosophically where this defense defense lives. You do. K-Jack back there at the safety, he's probably their best free agent acquisition. The secondary has been, we call it the quilt because it's been so patchwork this year. They're not blanketing anybody. They're just quilting them. But they got the second corner has been a problem. Bryce Callahan was hurt. He hadn't been able to get out there. I don't know if it's out there yet, but he's going to end up winding up on the IR. They had him practice at first this week, but it's just not going to happen. So he's going to wind up on the IR. So that was, Bryce Callahan was a big free agent addition. He's not been available. Yadam, who they drafted a couple of years ago, was an absolute liability out there. So they bring in Devontae Bosby, who looked fantastic for a couple of weeks till he got hurt. And then you go to, now they got Devontae Harris out there, who's been very, very good as well. But, finding anybody behind him has been a problem. They brought in Cody Sensabaugh. He was a liability. Duke Dawson struggled to pick up what they're trying to do. He's been hit or miss. And then they went out and got Cyrus Jones off waivers this week. I don't think you're going to see much of him. So it's just been very, very patchwork. They're led by Chris as the veteran leader. Justin's the best player. Incredibly rangy safety out there. I think people don't realize just how athletic he is. Not exactly the world's biggest hitter. He kind of, if you go back and look at the Raiders tape, he didn't look like he wanted any part of Josh Jacobs when he's coming downhill at him. But if you're a receiver with the ball, he'll shoulder check you out of bounds. He's a willing hitter. He's just not like great at it. So, I think that pretty much encompasses it. Kareem Jackson's the big hitter, and it's funny because he's probably the smallest guy out there.
Are they a sides defense? Does somebody consistently line up on the right side and someone on the left side?
Well, at times they'll move around. They mirror the safeties. I mean, you'll see Justin go left, go right. You'll see Chris go left, go right. They move people around. It's not a field side, boundary side defense. They'll do that at times, but it's really just, we just kind of how they make the call and how they want to follow the play and keep everything in front of them, and then, try to get you in the red zone and hold you to field goal or turn you over.
What are the opportunities for the Vikings offense, do you think? Because Dalvin Cook, obviously, he's having a remarkable season. Some people, are claiming that he's got an MVP season in him, which, if position doesn't matter, maybe he does. But, it seems like it's a kind of a difficult defense to run against. They don't have Adam Thielen, but they still have Stephon Diggs. Kirk Cousins has been up or down. Against pretty good defenses, he's had a lot of problems. What are the opportunities for the Vikings offense here?
I think that the key to this one is going back to the Chargers tape against the Broncos. You see how they were able to be effective getting Austin Eckler the football. It's on those swing, flat pair, kind of routes out there at the flats. Broncos struggle with that a little bit. Their outside linebackers, Von Miller, Malik Reed, are not coverage guys, and they're not very good at that. So, the Chargers chipped away at them a lot by doing that. If you got a guy who can play, if you got a possession receiver who can work the 10 to 15 yard game, and you got a running back with some space who can create in space like Dalvin and catch the ball, you have a reasonable shot at being successful against the defense. I think that's what you need to do. Just hammer those flats with passes, force them to come up, and then go over the top once they come up to defend those flats.
Similar to that are screen passes, although they do operate a lot differently in terms of the way they work. And the Vikings seem to have loved these screen passes. They were really effective last week. Is that kind of another opportunity? I mean, the Broncos just don't blitz as much, but it seems like this is still an opportunity the Vikings could have.
Yeah, I brought them to see how successful you can be. They've been pretty successful against the screen, to be honest with you. It's like I said, it's really been those swing routes that they really struggle with, or if you get orbit motion going and get somebody out in the flat that way, they just struggled. Once you get outside of that outside linebacker, Von and Malik are just so used to coming downhill after the quarterback, they just don't know what to do. And so that's really kind of been their Achilles heel all year.
All right, so big picture view, which matchups on when say the Denver's on offense against the Vikings defense, do you think give Denver a lot of opportunity, and then which matchups should Denver be the most worried about when they're on offense?
Well, you guys linebacking core and defensive front is pretty good. I worry about the Broncos' run game and their ability to get to establish early, and if they're not able to do that, that's going to put a lot on Brandon Allen. I don't think he's capable of. I think the secret matchup here is Tim Patrick against whoever he's up against. Everybody's familiar with Cortland Sutton, but nobody's got tape on Tim this year. Last year, he was really good, and I think he could surprise people in this game. And I think if you're a Vikings fan, that's the matchup you're kind of keeping your eye on. And also whoever's covering Noah fan. Noah's highly athletic. It just depends on who shows up. If Noah brings his gloves or if Noah decides he doesn't want to catch the ball today. So I think those are the matchups to watch up on offense. On the other side of the ball, obviously you're going to get Chris Harris against Stephon Diggs for a large portion of the game. So if you're going to exploit the Broncos, you're going to have to hit the flats with the running backs, and then you're going to have to be able to work the tight ends over the middle of the field and find the soft spot in zone.
All right. And then, we don't typically talk a bunch about special teams. Any interesting notes there?
Spencer's got home run threat ability. He's good. The problem is he gets in his own head, it's like he's trying to make the team every week. He'll go and try to return balls. He doesn't need to return, just let them go over his head. And I talked to him in the locker room the other day. I was like, man, you already made the team. You need to let those balls on the 7-yard line go over your head. But he makes some mistakes with that kind of stuff, trying to return things he shouldn't return. It's like he's trying to put together a highlight reel. He's quick, he's fast, and if you give enough space, he can return one. But I think that's about all you need to know. Kobe Wadman has been shaky, and in a game that feels like it's going to have probably some field position things going on, that could be a concern. McManus can hit from anywhere, so that's even when you don't think you're in field goal range, you might be. But otherwise, that's pretty much the Broncos' special teams.
All right, and then game predictions. We don't hold anyone accountable to these, but if you could predict a score, Vegas seems to indicate that it's going to be something like a 15-25 game, 10.5-point spread, or 10, depending on which book you're looking at. 40 is the over-under. Crazy low scoring over-under there. What do you think's happening?
I think that over-under is pretty right on. I think that score will be a little closer. The Vikings are going to win this football game. I should tell you that. But I think the score is going to be closer than you think. Broncos are really good at chewing up time. They're really good at making you have to commit to lengthy drives. And it just doesn't allow for a lot of points in a game unless they turn it over, like they did in the Packers game, that kind of stuff, or the Chiefs game. So, I think that I think it's probably going to be closer than people think. I think a 23-20, 23-17 type of game. You're probably going to see multiple field goals, and you may get 2 or 3 touchdowns combined out of these two offenses.
All right. Anything else you want to plug?
Well, Carson Wentz's charity's got this thing coming up. I'm sure you're super interested in it.
You never stop, man. Hey, thanks for coming.
No, absolutely. Anytime.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is going to be from John Belk, who asks, given Arif's, quote, a good defense with a smart coordinator is Kirk Kryptonite take, the Broncos seem like a nightmare matchup. What are you realistically hoping to see from Cousins, and what would your ideal game plan be? Is this one of those rare times where the hated play conservative offense and let the defense win games strategy is appropriate, or is that just never the correct call?
No, I like it. So I talked a little bit, obviously, with Benjamin about it, and I asked about screens. We have to see if kind of those screens will be available to the Vikings over the course of the game. Obviously, the Vikings are very good at screens. The Broncos are good at defending screens. That's what good defenses do. But I do think that a conservative strategy with limited shots, and you should take shots, but limited shots over the top, probably away from Justin Simmons, if possible, is probably the way to go. I think you can kind of just trust, Stephon Diggs to win on slants, Dalvin Cook to break some tackles, and so on. But yeah, I think that, playing conservative on offense, which doesn't necessarily mean running the ball more often than normal, although, I can see why that would be kind of beneficial in this case. That seems smart given Cousins' propensity to really struggle against good defenses. The thing is, when we talk about, quarterbacks struggling against defenses and tending to prefer the run in those situations, usually that take is wrong, because generally speaking, a good running game won't be as good as a bad passing game. But given Kirk's numbers this year, last year against really good defenses, his yards per attempt in some of these games is lower than a good running game. So if the Vikings can actually generate something like 5 yards a carry, and it's a little bit different, right? Because for running games, they tend to come in 1, 2, 3 yard chunks, just like, Albright described with Philip Lindsay, before you break it off and kind of correct or skew the average, however you want to think about it. It is a little bit different because you generate fewer first downs, and so your EPA overall, it accumulates negatively. But I do think that the risk of these interceptions, I think there is an argument for the run game in this particular case. So yes, I would be comfortable kind of letting field position and the defense kind of dictate things. If this ends up being kind of like an Oakland game where the offense can't finish in the red zone and you end up with like 19 points on 8 drives or whatever, which again, that's effectively fairly good offense given that it's only 8 drives. It's just frustrating to watch. That I see that as being a potential path to victory. And because, we talked about a little bit, the over-under is just wild. It's an implied score of 15-25 in the Vikings' favor. And I agree with Benjamin that the score is going to be probably closer than 10.5 points. Just because, how often do you see an over-under like that with the spread that large? I expect a defensive game, and I expect the Vikings to win that, even though the Broncos are playing statistically as a better defense, because their offense is so bad. I think the Vikings defense will really benefit. So yeah, play a conservative offense, let the defense win game strategy. I think that's pretty appropriate. I would feel more comfortable with the first possession than I typically do. And I typically feel a lot more comfortable with the first possession than a lot of coaches do. So any chance you can score first and then really tighten the screws with the conservative offense, I think is a chance you should take.
Speaking of their defense, a New York Vikes fan asks, should we be worried about how the offense performs, maybe specifically the O-line, going against Von Miller in a team that's 6th in points against?
Yeah, I think so. The good news is that Von Miller will primarily be lined up against the Vikings' best offensive tackle, or best offensive lineman, honestly, given that Klein has not performed since he's come back from injury and will not be in this game with Dakota Dozier. It's a worry. The matchup is pretty favorable in terms of style. Again, Benjamin Albright talked about that a little bit. But as Miller does tend to rely on the speed rush, and because apparently he's hesitating on these rushes by design, and O'Neal is much better against speed than against power, that is a good matchup, which is not to say that Miller won't get his and win a couple of them. But I think there's something there. I am really concerned about that interior. You might not be able to run the ball with Mike Purcell in there. You might see a lot of pressure because of Shelby Harris. There's a lot to be concerned about with that interior offensive line. And, Bradbury, it looked like he was, kind of bouncing back, moving forward and kind of putting some bad games behind him. But then he kind of dropped off again. And if his improvement is sputtering or not genuine or whatever, then this is kind of a bad game to be entering from an offensive line perspective. So yeah, that's a worry.
Oh my God. So when the GIF comes up on Twitter, you'll need to see it, but Myles Garrett is likely going to get suspended for either 4 games or the rest of the season.
Sorry, what?
Myles Garrett just...
I just saw Justice tweet out, "See you in 2020, Myles."
Myles Garrett just took the helmet off of Mason Rudolph and hit him with it.
Oh my God!
I don't see what I mean. This game,
it's not even close to. Oh my God! And it turned into
like actual. It kicked him in the head.
Into a fight.
You kicked him in the helmet, and he had the helmet on. Like, how dumb are? What is wrong with you people? This is why Cleveland can't have nice things.
So 53, whoever that is, just starts wailing on him, just punching him, starts kicking him. And I can't feel too bad about it. Like, yeah, you're probably right. You should punch and kick Myles Garrett a couple of times.
I can't. You took his helmet off.
Just throwing punches. Wow.
Yeah, Myles Garrett ripped off Mason Rudolph's helmet and swung it at him like a weapon.
So that was Pouncey that was responding? I don't know if I feel that bad about, and I don't like Pouncey.
Boy.
I just don't. But I don't, yeah, that is Marquise Pouncey. I don't feel that bad about Marquise Pouncey. But you hit somebody with a helmet, man. Like kicking someone in like the breastplate pad is not nearly as bad. like probably like at some point hold back, but like
yeah,
I don't feel that bad about Marquise Pouncey responding.
That is
anyway. Live update from Norse Code.
Hope you enjoyed that. Ian Pauly asks, seems like few teams will be as well versed as Denver with what Kubiak likes to do with the running game. What are some ways he, and more specifically Stefanski, can do to keep Denver's D on their heels?
Well, so the great thing about the way Kubiak designs the run game is that the zone running can be diverse. And typically we think of zone running as basically two plays, outside zone, inside zone. But they have added, I think, a lot of elements to the zone running system that makes it less predictable or kind of changes things up. You've got mid zone, which people just don't talk about that much, but is an additional zone running play. You've got split zone, which the Vikings have used a lot recently, especially because it generates benefits on play action, because now you get an extra pass protector on what would otherwise be a naked bootleg. You've got pin and pull zones, which he uses a little bit less of, but does tend to show up in zone running schemes where you actually pull a player on a zone run. There's a bunch of things that you can do to accommodate that. But honestly, I think that the fact that the Broncos are very familiar with that style of offense doesn't stop it from being a fairly good matchup schematically against the type of players that they've got in the middle. Like I wouldn't run towards Von Miller all that often, but I think running in the other direction away from Mike Purcell and stuff like that, I think it really tests the athleticism of that defensive line. And, this might be one of the few cases where offensive line athleticism matches up well against that defensive line in terms of athleticism. So I'm not too worried about the fact that they're familiar with that style of offense. Really the issue, or at least from a running perspective, really the issue to me is on play action. Are they going to be able to kind of recognize it and suss it out a little bit better? Or what? Like if you have a naked bootleg and Myles Garrett knows it's play action and he's the unblocked defender, I'm gonna have a bad time. So that's the concern. But I from a running perspective, I'm not too concerned, especially because like teams have all had a lot of practice against zone runs, and the Vikings run it maybe a little bit differently. They angle their hips differently and stuff like that. But for the most part, not too concerned about it from that perspective.
Next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, it looks like the Broncos will be starting a rookie QB. How do defenses prepare for a QB with no pro film? Is it just college tape, or are there other unique ways to prepare?
There's a variety of ways. I've asked Mike Zimmer this a couple of times, and I'll probably ask him again after this game. But yeah, college film actually does play a pretty big role in prepping for a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of NFL film. The offensive tendencies that the offense generally has, plays a role. Like, do they like to throw it on 2nd and 10? Is that kind of a general thing that speaks more to the coordinator? And unless you've got a quarterback that is so radically different, and Brandon Allen is different than Joe Flacco in some pretty significant ways, but unless it's like Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson, I don't know that those offensive tendencies will change too much. Maybe they'll kind of coach the linebackers to be lined up kind of a yard close to the line of scrimmage to defend against the run, and change their landmarks a little bit and change the blocking angles a little bit and anticipate run a little bit more often. But, and maybe bring a safety down and play more cover 3 than cover 4, or cover 2 or anything like that. But yeah, I think college film plays a pretty significant role. The key is not to prepare too much, basically. Because if you kind of over prepare or overfit your expectations to what they did in their only NFL game, like Brandon Allen, or in his college career, which wasn't even last year, it was 2 years ago. Is Brandon Allen? I don't think Brandon Allen's a rookie, is he? I don't
believe so.
I'm just Googling it now just to make sure I don't look like an idiot. But yeah, he was drafted in 2016. So yeah, he doesn't have a lot of NFL film. I wouldn't even expect them to pull up his preseason film. This is just kind of play your standard defense type of stuff, and then throw in a couple wrinkles here and there, and then maybe kind of anticipate the fact that this is not the quarterback that they'd want in there to be Drew Lock that they'd want in there. They know that he's a scrambler, so maybe they'll kind of contain a little bit more. They know that he can escape the pocket a lot, so maybe put a quarterback spy. They know that he likes to extend plays, so kind of coach in man coverage to stay underneath a little bit more often, that kind of stuff, but not over prepare.
All right. Also from Kenneth Allen is Arif and PFF seem to have very different opinions of the Vikings cornerbacks, with PFF ranking all three of the starters in the very low 50s and in the bottom half of cornerbacks for the year. What explains the difference in opinion, especially given Arif generally likes PFF grades?
Yeah, I do. I do generally like PFF grades. I think that people forget that when they talk about the eye test, they're talking precisely about what PFF does. Because people talk a lot about how they're like an analytics company, and that has become true, but that's not the core of what they do. The core of what they do is watch plays and grade players based on what they're supposed to do. And I think people dismiss them way too readily. I think the fact that they can predict outcomes and that their grades help them beat Vegas with the green line stuff, and beat Vegas in terms of beat the opening line and stuff like that, not like incredible closing line, winning odds. I think they actually lose against closing odds. But Eric Eagers mentioned on his podcast that there may be an effect of publishing PFF green line on betting lines, which, maybe if that's true, that's really ambitious. Gamblers have bought their data before in the past when it used to be $5,000 to access all their data. That's all pretty significant evidence that stuff is really useful and works. So the fact that you can do a pretty good job against Vegas is really remarkable. And I think that's really good evidence that the PFF data is good. So as to why I disagree about kind of the way PFF has treated the Vikings cornerbacks this year, and I mean, you could argue, the way they've treated Xavier Rhodes over the past 2 years feels a little off, is I think that they've kind of over-assigned a lot of these coverage mistakes to Rhodes and under-assigned them to the safeties, who, by the way, are like two of the top 5 safeties in the NFL right now by PFF. And I think that their grades should be dinged, and I think that the cornerbacks' grades should be improved based off of, kind of some of these plays that they've assigned to them in coverage. So, for example, I've talked about this a number of times. Week 2, play action, Devontae Adams, 39 yards. I think that's on Harrison Smith. Last week or 2 weeks ago, a couple of plays that, Anthony Harrison cover 2 should have stayed on top of, and Trey Waynes gets dinged for them. This happens every so often. Sometimes I'll send them a note saying I kind of disagree with who got credit for it. And sometimes they look at it again and have a discussion with me, and sometimes they'll even change it, which they don't usually. They've got usually a really good grasp of what's going on. But in these cases, I think they're not quite correct about assigning credit or blame. So, I really love the work that they do, and I think people should respect them a lot more because they triple check every single play that they grade, which is every single play. And their work is predictive. It's more predictive than any other statistic you can put out there, especially for quarterback. I've tested, quarterback development and quarterback prediction for wins, and PFF grade beats out QBR and adjusted net yards and EPA and passer rating and every quarterback statistic you can come up with. And so that's really meaningful to me that can be the case. So I think it takes a high bar to kind of disagree with what they do, and I think people are way too dismissive. But I think in the context of cornerback play for the Vikings in this season, I think they're a little bit off in terms of their assignments, and I think it's because the Vikings are making kind of unusual scheme choices that Zimmer's alluded to in the past. And I don't fully trust, Zimmer offloading all the responsibility on the cornerbacks, but I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I usually hate the phrase "the truth is somewhere in the middle" because I think it appeals to the golden mean fallacy. But in this case, I think it's there because I think Zimmer does have actual insight, and he's just kind of being defensive, and that bias is pulling him in one direction. And then PFF has a process that works 99% of the time, but in this case, because they're not always looking for the nearest defender, which is what I think is kind of the natural conclusion. But in this case, I think that they're just being a little bit too harsh.
Next question is from Nathan Atkins, who asks, could Oli Udoh make the switch to left tackle and someday replace Reef?
I mean, he could. I just think that's wildly optimistic. It's not impossible. I mean, Jason Peters is a drafted free agent, right? He was originally a tight end, converted to tackle. So obviously, you can produce really high-level tackles from 6th, 7th round picks. And so that possibility is there. And I haven't seen anything from him that would foreclose that opportunity. I don't think that he has played so poorly or anything like that I would say, hey, this is just not happening. It's not like, in previous years when we watched, was it Tyrus Thompson from Oklahoma or what was his name, Bond from North Carolina, who I think was a guard, not a tackle. But it's not like when you watched them, even the rookie year, you were like, well, they're lost. I don't think they can do it. So that possibility exists. I just don't think it's very likely based off of what I've seen. He'd have to make a really enormous leap in development. I found it interesting that it was his footwork that seemed to improve over college, because that's the most difficult thing to work on. It's one of the biggest problems that TJ Clemmings had. Also a small school raw tackle that had, a bunch of athletic upside and was a really big player with a lot of arm length and stuff like that, went, 6 rounds before Oliudo did. Was because his footwork was better than his handwork, whereas for Udo is kind of the other way around coming out of Elon, and that's just a much, much harder fix. And so I'm encouraged by what I've seen, but I don't think he's at a point where he can do that. And I think the plan for him, and I think they would love to be kind of surprised if they were wrong, but I think the plan for him is to be kind of a swing backup.
All right. The next question I had to do a little bit of research on. It's from Jacob Cost, who asks, who's got the worst uniforms in the NFL?
If we're talking about current uniforms, it's the Bucs. The alarm clock jerseys don't do it. And the rest of the color scheme is just not that appealing to me. I love their creamsicles. I think they're kind of polarizing, but most people seem to like them a lot, but the ones that don't really hate them.
I think the people who don't like them tend to be the type that watched them play in the creamsicles initially.
Oh, well, that's fair. I mean, that's like they had the longest losing streak in history, right? But they just had 12 game seasons, so they couldn't get the record.
Yeah.
That's fair. But man, those alarm clock numbers are just brutal.
They don't do it for me. But if we're talking about for the most part, other than a few glaring exceptions, most of the uniforms are fairly decent. But if we're talking alternates, the first one I want to mention,
the Steelers. Throwbacks?
You know what? I'm going to ignore the Steelers one because I thought that was okay. But
you thought the Steelers throwbacks with the bumblebees
with
was
the
okay?
bumblebee stripes thing? I actually thought that was kind of interesting. What I didn't like was the Packers kind of khaki and blue and navy, mid
delivery driver, but with blue.
Yeah, just weird. Like that one, and maybe it's just association with the Packers there. But God, that looks just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not that important to extricate your bias on a question like this, but maybe I don't know. Maybe that plays a role. I think the biggest issue is that they tried to translate the leather helmet, and that's why you had the brown helmet. I think that's why, which I think that's just dumb. Just make up a helmet, right? Because if you're using the leather ones, well, they're all going to be brown. That's not unique.
Yeah, if we toss green in here for the helmet, it'll look weird.
Right? Well, I mean, you could have used a navy blue helmet with the yellow whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like that. Maybe that works. But I don't love those. I just the B stripes. I can't. I understand it's unique and therefore a little bit interesting, but sometimes unique's not great. It's okay to be different, but not that different.
Wow, that's actually the name of your self-help book. You'll be going around to high schools and having signings here soon.
Hey, I shaped children's futures for a living for a while, so I hope they don't have any trauma.
Zen Cupid asks, is Pat Elfline's mustache so bad it's good, or good lord that's horrid?
I'd say it's so bad it's good, but I understand the question.
Yeah. Damian Barrett asks, what does a Dalvin Cook holdout look like, and who blinks first? Cap space will be an issue next year, but with Cousins' contract up in 2021, do you think he'd wait till then?
I think he wants a deal sooner rather than later because of the security associated with the new deal and kind of his history. Plus, it's the best season possible to be asking for a new deal, right? So I think it happens sooner rather than later. And the thing is, you can hold out for a deal and you can be okay with the cap hit for that deal coming later. They don't have to demand that all that money be caught up in cap space in 2020, right? Because if you get a huge signing bonus, that gets prorated in terms of cap it over the next 5 years. And so you don't have to feel the impact of that right away. So if your base salary is really low in that first year of the contract and you sign a big signing bonus, you get a lot of take-home money on day one. But the accounting effect on the cap is a pretty low first year hit. And then the second year, it gets kind of big, and you make it up for it in the back end. So I don't think he'd have to wait for that. And I think a holdout is certainly a possibility where I don't know what blinking first is, but if it means waiting until OTAs, if you miss an OTA, for a holdout. Maybe that means that the Vikings blinked first because they want you at OTAs and you're holding out. If you wait until training camp, I don't know what the bar for that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if a holdout went all the way to training camp, but was resolved right before it. They tend to resolve these. The Vikings haven't had recently a lot of players bring a holdout. Well, first of all, holdout at all. I mean, they tend to show up to practice while they're negotiating a new deal. But in particular, bring a holdout into the season or even into training camp. So I would expect it to be resolved before then, but I wouldn't be shocked if a holdout occurred, and I wouldn't be shocked if it took until training camp. If that answers the question about who blinks first, I don't think that they'll agree to whatever Dalvin's demanding, but I also think that Dalvin will be demanding a lot and will get a lot more than probably I would pay him if I had Ziggy Wolf's money. Obviously, more than I would pay him now. I can't pay him.
So that you messed up in life when James Harrison is tweeting about how bad you did on a football field or how violent you were?
Oh, Jesus.
James Harrison, that's assault at the least. 6 months in jail on the street. Now add the weapon, and that's like a year, right?
I hate saying this about James Harrison, but he's not wrong.
A couple of different views have come up in slow-mo where he's actually hit in the head with the helmet too.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Rudolph is kind of fine.
He just looked. He had the same look on his face as every Steeler receiver tonight when they went up for a ball and they didn't catch it and they were looking for a flag. He wasn't afraid for his life. He just wanted the flag. Raul asks, who is your favorite Vikings coordinator turned head coach? Billick, Tomlin, Shermer, and is the real answer Stefanski?
Well, obviously the answer is Frazier, who I think might get another head coaching gig. I mean, look what he's doing in Buffalo. He's killing it with these defenses, man.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe. They tend not to give defensive head coaches second chances, so we'll see. But actually, I don't know, Billick's fun. In terms of favorite, he's a great personality. I read his book and I really like kind of his commentary. He produced a couple videos for YouTube a while back that are actually really illuminating and really helpful. So the favorite person who happened to be a coordinator that turned into a head coach is probably Brian Billick. I think obviously Billick was probably the best coordinator out of all of them. Obviously the best head coach out of all of them is Tomlin. But in terms of my interactions with them, I had very few interactions with Frazier, although some. I had very few interactions with Shermer, although some. And obviously I had no interaction with Billick or Tomlin. They were before I started covering the Vikings or even was following the team, honestly. But in terms of interacting with them, probably John DeFilippo, honestly, because he was really kind of open in his pressers. He was really willing to kind of just give you honest and lucid, illuminating answers. And he would just kind of willingly take your question on face. He was never condescending. And so he's actually really great from the perspective of what I do for my job. I don't know if that answers the question, but from different perspectives, Billick is an answer, Tomlin's an answer, DeFilippo's an answer. I think the most impressive job was probably Shermer, who was able to create a really good offense out of a really awful situation. But personally, I just really enjoyed covering DeFilippo.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, Arif needs to run a restaurant for a weekend, and Dusty needs to write an article for The Athletic. Whose absence is least noticeable?
My absence is least noticeable, clearly.
Even Dusty chimed in on that one. Everything will be wet and destroyed and on fire. That's just...
Yeah, like, I can cook. That is not the same thing as running a restaurant at all. Eating might be 10% of the job.
Really, cooking is about 10% of running the restaurant. Everything else is luck and dealing with the actual owners.
Yeah, I'm bad at dealing with people. I am awful at logistics. I don't think I'm a particularly great leader.
Shut down corner.
I can run an escape room. I can be the leader of a team in an escape room.
I like the idea of you being a shut down corner, but also a cancer in the locker room.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
God.
Like proselytizing and
yeah. Don from Ohio asks, if I had to choose just one streaming service, what should it be? The answer is obvious.
So, yeah, we talked about this before the show. Came up with the clear answer.
And it's the one that has the porn sounding name, which is PureFlix.
But is the most godly of all the streaming services. There's no porn.
There is just like wall to wall
just Christian movies.
Yep, wall to wall Kirk Cameron. And
do you want to watch Left Behind's 1, 2, and 3, but for some reason they never made 4 and 5? There you go, PureFlix.
Now you finally have the opportunity. You
want to watch God's Not Dead 1, 2, and 3? There you go.
Yeah, PureFlix. I've been leaning so I don't know what you subscribe to. I have a Netflix account.
You subscribe to?
Well, I have a Netflix account. I have Sling. I have Hulu, and I have HBO Now.
You probably have Prime too, right?
I have access to it, I believe, now that I'm thinking about
you
it.
Don't use it enough to count it. Yeah,
not particularly, no. Yeah. But I lean towards Sling as being the one that I use like the most because of and I have the base version of that. It's like I think it's like $20. But I've noticed as I've gone into Hulu, which I got purely so I could watch Letterkenny. But as I've experienced more and more of Hulu stuff, and now that I'm noticing the whole like live TV aspect of Hulu, I think Hulu might replace Sling. So I'm kind of on the fence.
That's fair. So I only use live TV services for sports, like a lot of people. I've enjoyed Fubo.tv for sports coverage and their live stuff. I've used CBS All Access for Star Trek, and it's actually really easy to work to all of CBS's like stupid reality shows. So sometimes that's just on. Like I'll watch like 40 seasons of Survivor while I'm writing a football article. It's fine.
Which might explain some of the tangents.
Right, and I was able to charge CBS All Access to The Athletic because they carried the AAF. Which I can't do next year, unfortunately.
Is that like me trying to do a tax write-off for the new version of Madden so I can become familiar with the team that we're covering that week?
Right.
'Cause I'm doing it this year.
That's pretty good.
I'm doing it this year. We're calling it good.
These are basically more detailed PFF grades. Let's go.
Exactly.
I noticed Drew Lock has a lot of throw power, but not a lot of medium accuracy.
For some reason, whenever I'm playing as the Chicago Bears, a mid-range left throw just never completes. I don't understand. Even though I throw it toward the receiver.
Yeah, so I've used Fubo, I've used CBS All Access, Hulu. I've used Hulu Live as well as Hulu, which I don't like super love their live stuff, but it's really useful. And you get local channels with live, which you don't tend to with all these other services.
That's the thing that I've been thinking about, because if I'm able to actually do the live streaming of like CBS and Fox, then
which is incredible, I think. Yeah,
that would assist in Sunday afternoons with a more steady stream of football that I would be watching on my TV legally.
Yeah, so totally legally. So I do Prime, I do Netflix, like I just mentioned Hulu. We just got Disney Plus. And so if I were to pick just one of those, it is probably Netflix, but if I get to pick that Disney Plus bundle with ESPN Plus and Hulu, that's the one I would pick. The Disney Plus with Hulu, which doesn't include Hulu Live. You have to pay for that on top of it, which like makes sense. It's like a $40 value, right? Yeah. That's probably best as a bundle, but as a singular service, I'm probably taking Netflix. I actually really do like Amazon streaming stuff, but like there's just like not enough of it. And Disney Plus, like it has like the most interesting properties that are most culturally relevant, but also not a ton of stuff. Although like if you just start exploring, there's like way more than you thought. The way they organize it makes it feel like there's a lot less than there actually is. There's a ton on Disney Plus, but not the kind of stuff I'm necessarily interested in terms of the variety that they have. That's usually Netflix, but that bundle is just really remarkable.
When people were showing off on Twitter about Disney Plus having the X-Men cartoon from the 90s,
yeah, and they got Gargoyles. We watched like 3 episodes of Gargoyles last night. What a show! But also no, great.
Yes,
incredible.
But when the people are showing off the X-Men thing, all I could think of is, oh yeah, when the kid was first born, that was one of my go-to shows that I like made it through the entirety of while I was trying to put the kid to bed. And I just have a pair of headphones on and I'd just be watching that. So I was like, oh yeah, I've watched all of those recently, and they for some of them they still really do hold up, especially Mr. Sinister stuff. But also from Don from Ohio, with the debut of Disney Plus, what is the most racist movie in Disney history? Well, it's kind of like one of those discussions on CNN when they're trying to determine what the new N-word is. And they can actually say the word of what like the new N-word is, but nobody ever says what the N-word is. It's kind of like that with Disney Plus and the movie Song of the South, which is where the song Zippity Doo Dah comes from. It is interesting. And I remember it's never received a DVD release officially. Some people have taken VHSs and converted them to DVD and sold them on eBay. But Disney itself has never released Song of the South on DVD. It is...
Well, okay, so it is a positive depiction of white Southerners in... into the antebellum South that also happens to include positive depictions of slavery, which is a poor decision. What I find really interesting about Song of the South, even for the 40s, what I find interesting about Song of the South is that purportedly Walt Disney didn't want it to be racist, which, I mean, if you know the rumors about Walt Disney, you'll scoff. But you know, cause like the rumor is that he's anti-Semitic, and there's like a rabbit hole in exploring this rumor of like, it's not as true as I originally thought. Maybe it's more complicated anyway than I originally thought. But, and hey, I don't know, let's link, the snippets page in the show notes, cause they do a pretty good summary. But, apparently he like hired some, Black people to like look over it at the time to see if it was like too racist. Then of course, you know, he cast African American actors, which was like, you know, not something you did in the 40s, but also it's like insanely racist.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But also like, it's also super racist. So like, what the hell?
If you have the desire to watch the movie, instead, I would ask you to watch the Angry Film Critic, the nostalgia critic. He does a very good breakdown of the movie. It's about 10 to 15 minutes, and he breaks down all aspects of the racist side of things, the positives of the movie, the animation, which is quite impressive, especially for the time, and
it's impressive now, honestly, which I hate saying. Well, it's like the 1930s Superman is actually pretty impressive animation even now.
Yep, I agree. I did wonder why all the buildings in downtown Detroit kind of looked like the buildings from the 30s Superman movies, but I wasn't going to ask any questions. I don't understand any of this, but this is kind of weird. I did also notice the Disney Plus is giving out or is putting the warnings out about the potentially racist content inside of the movies that are coming out, to the point where there was some rumor about removing the crows from Dumbo, which I don't know necessarily how you do, but if you're paying George Lucas already to for his properties, you might as well get some ideas as to how to change things.
Right. That said, it is important to bring up Dumbo, insanely racist. Peter Pan, incredibly racist. And then there's racist depictions. Even in The Little Mermaid, which is not that long ago in terms of Disney releases.
No.
It has racist depictions in it. It's a good time for everybody.
I was looking up a couple of things about things that have been removed from movies on Disney Plus, and one of them was a deleted scene, quote unquote, from Toy Story 2, where at the very end of it, this character that was in a box was basically trying to Weinstein two girls into getting a part into Toy Story 3.
Jesus.
I was like, oh God. Oh, well, this got awkward.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I hope that answers your question. Also, Don, while I appreciate you bringing up my name on the football machine yesterday, so that got pointed out to me. I'm gonna, what's gonna end up happening is I'm gonna catch a fish and it'll be filmed, and then I'm gonna post it, and people are gonna ask why there's no video of Arif doing it, and I'm gonna have to sit and explain, no, he got it, but the camera wasn't running. And people are going to immediately say that you never actually caught said fish. So I feel like if you want to quiet the haters, that you're going to have to be filmed catching a fish.
I don't even want to go. I've already done the thing. I don't even want to go back there. They just sell fish.
Why do you stomp on everything I love in this world? I just want to see you catching a fish, or actually, since you declared that it's so easy.
Yeah, that was a mistake, but it is though, right? They make it so that they don't want people to drop their product. They make it it's easy to whatever, man.
If it's thrown at you and you drop it, that is a little bit of I'd say a guarantee, a little bit of crow or something to eat along with said fish. All right, Arif, what do you have to plug?
I've got a piece on a Fadio Denabo going up. Obviously, the previews over at The Athletic are going to come up. But yeah, not a ton. Fewer articles this week than normal. Moved a little bit. Heard about that probably on the last show. Yeah, I'm going to be on Benjamin Albright's radio show tomorrow too, so tune in. We're probably going to tweet out a link.
All right, sounds good. That will be it for this episode of Norse Code. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be back next week to talk about hopefully the win over the Broncos, and then it gets a little bit quiet into the bye week. So we'll talk about that next episode. But for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And we'll see you next week.